Hey, everybody, we're back in the Shanty. I'm not alone in the Shanty. Well, I'm alone in the Shanty, but I have somebody with me on the Shanty. It's Janelle Shankin, and Janelle is one of our new, young, brilliant associates who thinks she wants to be an employment litigator. She's young. We'll see what happens. You never know. But she thinks she wants to be an employment litigator. So Janelle has been doing some really cool work at the firm involving criminal backgrounds and what's known as expungement. And for those of you that don't know, expungement, I don't know if this is what it really means, but it sounds like it to me. It's like sponging away your record. So we take a nice sponge and we wipe clean your record. And why are we talking about criminal expungement? Well, that's a great question. We're talking about criminal expungement because in 2020, with the overall goal of helping more Michigan residents obtain housing and employment that they might otherwise not be able to get because they had a criminal record, the legislature passed an act called the Clean Slate Act, and it was signed into law by the governor. The Clean Slate Act, I'm going to mess that up before we're done, you watch. The Clean Slate Act changed a bunch of parts of the expungement process. So first, it expanded what misdemeanors and felonies are eligible for expungement, as well as how many are expungible. The second thing it did is expanded traffic offenses that are eligible for expungement. It revised the waiting period to get offenses set aside. And the big thing, I think, for where we are now in Michigan today is it allowed marijuana convictions that are no longer crimes under the law as they sit today, but were crimes years ago when they were committed. It allowed those crimes to be set aside. And it created an automatic expungement process for some misdemeanors and non-assaulted felonies. In other words, felonies that don't involve violence. But that doesn't go into effect till 2023. But for right now, we've had a lot of people coming to us and saying, hey, we'd like help with this process. And we have a little pro bono thing going where we're helping people get this thing done. And it's really cool. Young people get a lot of experience like Janelle, and we get to help some people get their records cleaned up. It also means some stuff for you as employers, because now we have to answer the question, if I have an expunged criminal record and you've got a job application that says, have you ever been convicted of a crime? What does that mean? And what does it mean for you as employers if somebody says, no, they've never been convicted of a crime, but for some reason or somehow you find out that they actually were convicted of a crime, but it was expunged. So we're going to talk about that today, and Janelle's going to talk about that today. And it seems like I'm going to do all the talking, but I'm not. So Janelle,
yes.
Let me ask you a couple questions about this, and you can fill people in. Let me ask you this first. Are employers still allowed? Okay, let's start with the basics. Can we still ask about prior convictions, or do we have to change our job application and take that question out?
So employers still can ask about prior convictions, but specifically convictions that have not been set aside through the expungement process. So most convictions, at least through 2023, are not going to be automatically expunged. So an applicant has to actually go through the process and go through the courts to get a conviction set aside. Until they complete that process, it's still on their record and it's still able to be asked about. However, this is also a good opportunity for employers to sit down and think, what are we trying to achieve by asking about convictions? Is there, a job qualification that an employee needs to have where a conviction would make them ineligible for the job? It's also important to remember that there are other laws that could affect, how employees ask about prior convictions, such as the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Federal contractors have to be aware of the Clean Slate Act, which is a federal law limiting inquiries into convictions. So just being aware of that sort of landscape and tailoring questions to ask about non-expunged convictions, that's still allowed.
And that's a really good point. Okay, so we ought to think this is an opportunity for us to think about why are we asking that question, and should we ask it? Not only because of the Clean Slate Act we have here in the federal law and the executive orders that Janelle just talked about, but don't forget there are a bunch of states around the United States that have what are called ban the box laws. We don't have that in Michigan yet, but if you're hiring people from other states, you may have to deal with that where you can't ask about convictions, or you're limited as to when you can ask about those convictions. So don't forget that too if you're dealing with hiring in other states, you might have to deal with that state's law, and you might not be able to ask these questions. All right. So if we're not going to change, or if we're going to think about the question, and we're going to think about whether or not we want to keep asking it and change it or keep it in, does this change how we handle the application process if we use online applications? I just cut you in, or have employees in other states?
Yeah, so like you just said, Steve, it really depends on how the application is used. If you have an online application where you could be getting applicants from other states, you may be triggering, excuse me, you may be triggering other laws for different states, such as, Illinois, California, etc. The Michigan Clean Slate Act only applies, though, to individuals that have convictions in Michigan. So until those specific Michigan convictions get set aside, the Michigan convictions may still be inquired into. But again, different state laws, different federal laws may change the landscape of how and when you ask these questions of, have you been convicted of any crime?
Okay, and that makes complete sense. So with all of this being said, what kind of convictions are expungable? What can somebody have taken? And one quick question first, just so everybody's clear on this. If I've been convicted of a crime and you help me out and get it expunged, that crime is gone, right? I don't have to answer yes on my application anymore. It's gone, correct?
Correct, in a limited sense. I mean, the prior conviction still exists in terms of, courts looking at it for potential compounding factors for new crimes that are committed, or, the FBI's super deep search into an individual, that it still exists in those sense. But in terms of a general background check that employers would run, that crime is gone.
And so if I'm an employer and I happen to know somebody got convicted 10 years ago of something, but that conviction is now expunged, and they answer no on their job application, they're not lying on that job application anymore, right?
Correct.
They answered no, I haven't been convicted of a crime because it's been wiped away.
Correct.
All right. So let's talk about, again, what kind of convictions are expungable, and does this affect how we determine who meets job qualifications?
Yeah, so the new expungement law it changes not only what convictions are expungable, but when they're expungable. So the big ones are, low-level misdemeanors, marijuana offenses, like you mentioned, Steve, driving offenses, and it changes how long applicants have to wait. So previously, it was typically a 7 to 10 year waiting period. Now, for some low-level misdemeanors, it's as little as 3 years that an applicant has to wait before they can get that conviction set aside. Most offenses are still going to be inquired into about, what were the circumstances, how has the applicant been behaving since the conviction, to determine if it's going to be set aside. And something really important to know is crimes that have a potential sentencing of life in prison, even if it wasn't given, many violent felonies and many sex offenses are still not going to be expungable. So you don't have to worry about, an applicant coming in convicted of triple homicide and then having to be able to, say, no, I haven't been convicted of a crime because it's been expunged. Those sort of offenses are still going to be on the criminal record.
Well, and if you run a daycare, or if you run a home that takes care of disabled people, or if you run a facility for kids, we still have to worry about those sex offenses are still going to show up. There's still a sex offense registry, right? All that still exists.
Correct. There's very minor sex offenses that can be set aside, but none involving children, none involving violence. Most sex offenses are still going to be non-expungable, and the ones that are expungable are going to be the ones that you would think would typically not, disqualify somebody from a job, such as, public urination when they were a child.
Gotcha. All right. Anything else we need to know?
Just check with your attorney.
Yeah.
Check with your attorney if you got questions.
Yeah. See, look, you've been watching these. I do that every time. So this is something new we wanted you to be aware of. We know we're going to get questions on it as you start to get applicants who do have expunged records. You are going to find out about it. If you do have questions, call any one of us in the Labor and Employment Practice Group. We'll be happy to help you through it. If you think you want to do something with your job application, give us a call there too. I know this is a couple in a row where we talk about your job applications. The other thing that I do want you to be aware of is if you haven't looked at that job application in a while, you might want to go back and look at it. Every once in a while, from time to time, I actually see a job application that's got a question on it where I go, whoa, how'd that get in there? So if you haven't looked at it in a while, go take a look at it. Or if it's something you pulled off the internet, go take a look at it. And we'll be happy to review it for you. Thanks, Janelle, very much for joining us. We'll see you guys next time.